Good morning and happy Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. May we all blossom like trees. Okay. Continuing the conclusion and summary of Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on page 1441, the new paragraph. So let's just put this into context here. After a 5-page explanation of Yichud, Kudsha, Brich, V'Shchinta on all levels, Ad Reim HaMailas to the highest level, and that is achieved through mitzvahs, Ramach Mitzvos Esa, Ramach Pekudin, the 248 laws, corresponding to Ramach Evarim, the Malkas, the Tikkun Zayar says, to the 248 organs of the king. So they are part of him, the Etzem Mahus of the king. It's not the king himself, but it's a part of him, not like a garment, and not like oir, like we learned yesterday. So mitzvahs accomplish this. This is what they do. A mitzvah connects. So connects all the way from the lowest levels. So when a person puts on tefillin below, that in turn triggers a process of amshachas, to use the exact language that we learned. He said, "K'mei mitzvahs tefillin, shalmata, k'shadam ba'adam maniach tefillin al reish, mamshech alav b'chin zu shebemeichin dezun." He draws down mamshech on himself. This bechina shebemeichin is zah and malchus, which is Shem Ramach Evarim the Malkut Dezah, which are from the 200, that's where the 248 Evarim are, because we said Malka Kadisha, remember, is Zah. So the Evarim of Malka Kadisha are all the 248 so-called branches, or organs and limbs of Zah. So that's what he's mamshich. Shenasa Aydezeh Yichud Zun, Shu Yichud Kudsha Brich V'Shchinta. And that in turn creates the unification of Zah and Malchus, Kudsha Brich and Shechina. But it goes further than that. Because remember, it's not just one step. It's Kudsha Brich and Shechina all the way to the highest levels. So then he says, Ach Kamoy Kein Lamaila, but Adam Elyon. Not only the Adam Atachten benefits, the Adam Elyon as well, meaning the Atzilus itself also gets elevated. Zah of Atzilus gets elevated. So the Amshacha also is in Atzilus, not just from Atzilus to us, from Zah to Malchus, and then that into us, but also into Atzilus. How's that? Because there's also Kudsha Brich V'Shchinta in Keser. And as he continues to explain that there's two interpretations when HaKadosh Baruch Kudsha Brich Maniach Tefillin. What is Kudsha Brich? Is it Zah? Or is it Keser? And he says, V'akol echad. It's all one, because it's all one process. V'hainu, shebezah nimshachim meichin chadoshim mebchinas hakeser. Because in Zah, not only is Zah mamshich into Malchus and into us, but Zah is also nimshach into it, meichin chadoshim from Keser, which is called Kudsha Brichu, relatively speaking. And so goes, V'cheinu l'mayla mayla, Ad b'chinas Kudsha Brichu b'madrega hayeser gaveya, Atzmus shalamayla b'chinas eir. And so it goes all the way to the highest levels, to Kudsha Brichu in its purest form, which is Atzmus, higher than any form of manifestation or definition or expression, which we call eir. So you can understand from that too applies to all the Ramach Pekudin, to all the 248 mitzvahs. Okay. Then he said, this is the meaning in the pasuk where it says, "V'schartem as called mitzvahs havaya v'asisim esam," and then v'asisim is called mitzvahsai. That's not the same mitzvahs. Well, it's the same mitzvahs, but it's two different levels. Mitzvahs havaya is the imamshich alein b'chinas zav atzilus, and mitzvahsai is amshachah from mahus and atzmus, the higher level. So the Yichud Kudsha Brich V'Shchinta is nimshach from the highest levels all the way into the kav, and that's the Ramach Pekudin Ramach Evarim, the Malka, Evarim em etzem mahus, which is higher than Eir, going all the way to the core because they are very much part, as I said, they're limbs and organs of the entity itself, of the king himself. And that's what we concluded with mitzvahs. Now he's going to go back to Krishma. Of course, Krishma is the real main central theme here, because Krishma, as we go back, was when he was speaking about Avedas Adam, that when we say Shema, Kol HaMayach Be'echad, that whole discussion of extending the contemplation on Echad to the highest levels, which is the idea of also Kol HaEmer Amin Yeshmei Rabba B'chol Koiche. Chol Kavanose, he said, means Mayach Be'echad. So it's all about being mamshich. What was that lashon? Amin Yehei Shmei Rabba. If you remember, Shmei Rabba is the great name, the name of that goes all the way up higher than the Tzimtzum. Hayahu Shmei Belvad, ultimately to Shmei Atzmi. So this is all being nimshach through Krishma. What we need is support of the Malachim, and that's why we say Brich Yetzer before Shema. I'm going back to pages 1434, 1435, where we discussed that. Why we need Krishma, it's Yetzer before Krishma, because there's the Malachim that serve, as we talked about, the cosmic digestive system. They're the cosmic delivery, distribution agents, if you wish, that distribute the flow, both Mamayla Mata, Mamatla Maila. So they're like Mutsoyim that are serving their God's ambassadors and God's ministers. So Malach Machal, from there is Nimshach Ava, Malach Gavriel, from there is Nimshach Yira. So they're a support system to us. Obviously, they are not higher than the Neshamas. The Neshamas are higher, as we've learned. But nevertheless, like he spoke at length on page 1434 and 1435, the difference between the Neshamas and Malachim. But still, the Malachim still serve a role of helping support our Aveda, but ultimately, who's Lishtaba Begufa de Malka, who gets absorbed and encompassed within the Gufa of Malka, is Dafka Neshamas through mitzvahs, because Amach Pekudin, and through Krishma, which also has 248 words, as we're going to learn now. This is all the flow from the bottom of page 1435 to where we are right now. So now we go back to Krishma. So it's the new paragraph on page 1441, Aleph Taf Mem Aleph. Pages can be found, if you like to follow, at ayinbeis.com. So he says like this now, V'hini Yadua, the Krishma Hiklolos Kol HaMitzvos. Now it's known that Krishma encompasses, or Krishma is the general of all the mitzvahs. He'll explain why. I mean, the obvious reason is because it captures the idea of Hashem Echad, and that's the whole purpose of all mitzvahs, is to unify God within our lives, within our existence. So Shema captures the essence of it, but he's going to spell it out in more detail here. So this is a critical line, Krishma Klolos Kol HaMitzvos. I'll soon explain why, especially in the context of the Maimar Magbil Sheves from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe that we've learned. We'll get to that shortly, but let's first read inside here. Kamosha Kosov. V'zeis mitzvah. Pasuk says, and this is the mitzvah. Asher tziva Hashem lases ba'aretz. So, what mitzvah is he referring to? The pasuk afterwards says, V'emer achazeh, he only mentions one mitzvah. Rak mitzvah's krishma. So the fact that he says, V'zeis mitzvah, that God commands you to do on earth, so you would think he would say all the Tayyag mitzvahs, or at least all the 248 positive mitzvahs. The only thing he says afterwards is mitzvahs krishma. So what do we derive from that? Muvan mizeh, the krishma klolos ha-mitzvahs. So when you say zeis ha-mitzvah, so mitzvahs krishma is the mitzvah, meaning it encompasses all the mitzvahs. It doesn't mean you're absolved of doing the other mitzvahs. But it means Krishma is a mitzvah klalis Like he says, Klolus kol ha-mitzvos. V'hainu. And now, what's the explanation behind that? The b'chdei sheyeh amshachet the mitzvos liyas yichud kudsha brich v'shchinta kanal. In order that mitzvos, that the hamshach of mitzvahs should accomplish its goal of uniting the divine transcendent with the divine immanent, what we call Kudsha Brich v'Shchinta on all levels. Zeu aidei halaw de Krishma. That's through the elevation that happens in Krishma. Now, obviously, you could ask, what happens if a person doesn't say Krishma? So, first of all, if I recall correctly in the Torah Eid, I think he even brings that he says, no, he brings the opposite. Sorry, we'll get back to that later. But bottom line is, it's the halaw of Krishma that really elevates the mitzvahs in the fullest sense of the word. He's not saying you can't do a mitzvah without Krishma. We do mitzvahs throughout the day without Shema. But remember, Shema has an effect on the entire day. So it's through halaw de Krishma. Why? Because halaw de Krishma, and why is Krishma halaw? We'll soon learn that Krishma also has an element of hamshacha. But why is it halaw? Because he's saying Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We down below, listen, Yisrael, Neshamas Yisrael, Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and we're elevating existence, the ches and the dalet of existence, the seven heavens and earth, and the four different directions of the dalet into aleph. So it's halaw. And in general, Shema, tefillah is halaw and elevation. And generally, it's all about the Araveda here. The halaw de Krishma, b'chinas Atzmus Ein Sof. The halaw of Krishma reaches all the way into the core of Ein Sof. So he's adding now a whole piece about Krishma and its centrality, why it's such a powerful tefillah. He's going to explain that in a certain way it's even greater than Shema Nesrei. U'kamayim Razal, how do we know that it goes all the way to Atzmus Ein Sof? U'kamayim Razal, the Sifri, in Sifri in the Medrash, al the pasuk Mika Hashem Elokeinu b'chol kareinu Eilov. That who to God, to all, who's to God, b'chol kareinu Eilov, all those that call to Him. So the word expression is Eilov, to Him. So the Sifri says, it's actually, we don't have the Sifri in our Medrash, but the Pardes brings it, the Shema of the Sifri. It means in earlier generations they had a Sifri like that, though we don't have that, the Girsa, but it's brought in different footnotes. The Rebbe comments on that. So what is Eilov? So the Medrash is Medayik, Eilov, v'leila midaysov. Now you may have heard this expression. It's quite often. It means to Him and not to His attributes. Because the question that can be asked is, when you daven to Hashem, especially if you know the Kavanah, there's certain Shem Kael is connected to Chesed, and Shem Elokim to Gvura. So this was actually a debate in Sherish Rutzis Atfilah. Tzemach Tzedek brings a debate between a Kabbalist and a Halachist. He says, when you daven, are you davening to? Are you davening to God's so-called ministers, meaning His spheres? So he said, and he responded, the halachic said, Ani mispal l'daza atinuk. I pray like a child. I don't know about all these stations, these spheres. I pray like a child. So the Tzemach Tzedek goes on to explain that even those that know the kavanah of the spheres, God forbid, we're not davening to the spheres. We're davening to the one who emanated those spheres. It's just those spheres are like handles. Just like when you say in Tefillah, Reifah Chelim, God heals. Is God only a healer? Then you say, Chayin Ladas. You have all kinds of tefillahs. It's all one God. It's just different functions of God. So the point is, it's a love, v'leila midaysov. You're davening to Him, which means to Atzmus, not to His midas. His midas are just ways, handles for us to express our particular needs or to draw down. We need a bracha for parnasa. We need a bracha for children. you need a bracha for health. So he says, Eilov leili midesiv. And this sifri, this pasuk is going v'koyi al krishma. This is referring to Shema. Shakriya, kriya Shema. We call it calling Shema, kriya Shema. We're reading, we're calling out, because kriya is like a call. It's like a beckon and a call that we reach out. That shakriya v'halah hi Eilov dafka. The kriya of Shema is dafka Eilov, directly to etzem, to the Atzmus. B'chinas Atzmus ein sof. Now this is not the Rebbe Rashab's Chiddush. I'm not sure which Maimer it's from, but it's probably from an Alter Rebbe's Maimer. I have to find the exact source. So bottom line, so far he said two things. One is that Shema is Klolos Kol HaMitzvos. And the reason for that, like we say, V'zeis HaMitzvah, Krishma. And the reason for that is because in order for there to be the Hamshach of Yichud, Kudsha, Brich, V'shchinta, in mitzvah, through mitzvahs you need the Halah of Krishma. Because the Halah of Krishma has a particular power to reach all the way to the source, all the way to Atzmus Ein Sof. And since we want Yichud, Kudsha, Brich, V'shchinta from the highest level of Kudsha, Brich, in Atzmus, so Krishma is necessary to really achieve this Yichud, Kudsha, Brich, V'shchinta in mitzvahs. He's going to elaborate more on this, but this is so far what we've learned. Any questions before I continue? Okay. Now he's going to contrast it with other parts of davening, and namely Shema Nesrei. So what is Shema Nesrei in this context? So he's going to say Shema Nesrei has a different kavanah. Shema Nesrei, now we're always davening to Hashem. That's not a question. The question is what the focus is on. So it says, the B'Shema Nesrei tzarich liyas lechavim b'shem. So that's another lashon that's brought to Chazal, that when a person davens, you don't want to just say words, you have to have kavanah, intention. Tefillah b'lei kavanah, a prayer without intention, like a body without a soul, kaguf b'lei neshama. So there's an expression, l'chaven b'shem, to mechaven to the particular name of the God that associated with the different 18 blessings we say in Shema Nesrei. L'chaven b'shem dafke. So by Shema, you don't say Shem. It's going halah straight to Atzmus Ein Sof, like he said, Eilov. Whereas in Shema Nesrei, you could say it's not you're davening to Mideisav, but you're davening to Eilov as he manifests through Mideisav. The Hainu, what does that mean in the Chassidish language? What's the explanation means l'chavim b'shem? What's the point of having a name of Hashem, whatever the name may be, Havaya, Lakim, Kael, or the different permutations of Havaya? The Hainu, b'chinas ha'eres ha'mislapshim b'kelim. Once you already have a name, if you recall, a name is already a handle. When you call someone by name, you're not talking to their etzem anymore. Because the etzem doesn't need a name. A name means it's an association with something. Like the Medrash says, Lefi maisi ani nikra. The Medrash talks about the different names God has. So it says, God is only Hashem Echad. What do you mean? Why is he have different?
Lefi maisai ani nikra.
Yeah. What did I say? My sai. Yeah. According to my actions, that's what you call me. Question is, what do you mean? God is Hashem Echad. Why does he have different names? So the answer is still one God, but he has different functions. If Hashem is in the mode of Chesed, he's called Kael. When he's the mode of Gvura, he's called Elikim. Bereshis bara Elikim. When he's the mode of Rachamim, compassion, Havaya. When he's in the mode of a warrior, war, Svokes, from the name Sava, like we learned in the Bas Legani. So these 7 different names, the She'enim Nimchokim that God has, including Shaddai, and there's more as well, are all not, God forbid, that there's 7 different godly elements. It's basically one God, and according to his actions, according to his behaviors, functions. But those functions are important because, like I said, we want the brachas and we want the tefillah to be specific, not just in general. So Shema talks to Eilov. That's like the Mesiras Nefesh cutting straight to the etzem. It's like calling to your father and saying, Tate, my father, I want to connect with you. And your father says, so what do you want? And then L'chavim b'shem is the Eirus mislapshim b'kelim. That's already not the etzem. That's already Eirus as the mass. So there's the Eir in the Keli of Chesed, the Eir in the Keli of Gvura. He's giving an example. In Shema Encompasses we say, Atachein and das. You have bestowed us, you have endowed us with das. That's b'shem havaya. The kavanah there is b'shem havaya. B'nikud patach. So those that know the Kabbalistic kavanas know that you say, Atachein l'adam das, Atachein and das, it's Shem Havaya, but not Stam Shem Havaya. Shem Havaya can be written in several ways. You could write it with a kometz, under the Yud, under the Hey, and so on. Or you could write it with a patach. A patach is like a straight line when you say ya, ha. That's a patach. Shehu b'chochma. That's chochma. That's why it's called patach, actually, like open. Kometz is more closed. It's like when you purse your lips, you call it kmitze. When you open, it's called patach. So bottom line is, is chometz, is patach, it's expanding it. It's the kavanah that we say in Shem Havaya, patach, and chen and das. That's l'chavim b'shem. Another example, or brichas hashavenu. What's the kavanah there? B'shem Havaya, b'nikud seireh. Seireh is a. Seireh is the two dots that you pronounce a. So there's a. Shehu b'bina. That's in bina. So what do you see from this? That the different brachas in Shema Encompasses have different kavanas b'shemus, which correspond to the Eirus in the kelim. Havaya either in the keli of chachma, which is a patach, or havaya in the keli of bina, which is tzedek. I mean, this is a longer discussion for those understanding the kavanas in tefillah and so on. But when you go to, let's say, Siddur Arizal, or for other matter, there's other Siddurim, Siddur of Shalah, the Siddur of the Ramak, there's a lot of Siddurim, Rashash, that talk about the kavanas in prayer. And you'll see a lot of Havayas there with different nekudas, different punctuation marks. It's all based on, this is what this is based on. But the point being is that Shema Encompasses is much more L'chavim b'shem, which is more connected to the Midesa, meaning the Eirus b'kelim. We'll soon see the contrast to Shema. Shalzeh Eimer hadbik b'midesav. So we have the Lashon, it says, V'alachta b'drachav, you shall follow in God's paths. And it continues, an explanation of that is hadbik b'midesav. You should bind yourself, you should cleave to God's midas, which means you should emulate God's midas. Mahu chanun, afata chanun. Just as he is kind, you should be kind. Mahu rachum, afata rachum. Just as he's compassionate, you should be compassionate. So let me explain. Why is that not a stira to Eilov midesav? Because it's the same thing ultimately. Eilov is that you're talking to Hashem. But Hashem wants us also to be refined in our individual personality characteristics, not just you're connecting to God, but you're emulating God's ways. That when you walk on earth, you make a Kiddush Hashem by behaving like God would want you to behave. So you become a Kiddush Hashem, you're reflecting godliness in this world. Someone looks at you and says, wow, that is a godly person. So that comes down into midas. That's why it's not just enough to say, yes, I'm speaking to God and that's that. No, it has to translate that your behavior, your actual behavior becomes aligned with divine attributes. our chesed like Hashem's chesed, our gvura like Hashem's gvura. So that's what Shemona Esre's main focus is. That means connect yourself not just to the etzem, but also to the Eiris as the mislabish to the kelim. And that's the Lachavin B'Shem, each one a different sfira, a different a different shame, a different kavanah b'shem. By contrast, however, Umasha Omar Eilov Leila Midesav, Hu Bekrishma, Bekriyashma. The focus of what he said, Chol Karenu Eilov Leila Midesav, that's the Shema. Dafke. Shalohi ba'atzmus ein sof. Where there, the Aveda is not about bringing it down into your behavior. That comes in Shemona Esrei. But there's the Aveda of you connecting to Hashem Echad. In a way, V'afaftas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol ma'idecha. All that is a halah that you are binding yourself to God's unity. But the next step would be that you then draw that down into your behavior. Because as we understand, after davening, a person has to act on it. So the different stages in davening, he's saying, is Shema focuses on connecting to the Etzem, Eilov, V'leila Midesav, Atzmus ein sof. Shemona Esrei focuses on, obviously there's overlap, but it focuses on L'chavim B'Shem, to be mamshechit Eiris and Kelim. Eira mislabish b'kelim. And now he brings a source for all of this. I mentioned before a source, so here he has it. Says, like it says in the Siddur is the Mittler Rebbe composed, compiled and composed a Siddur from all the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe in the order of prayers. So there's a section called Shar HaKrishma, the gate of Krishma, so he discusses it there. And a second place, I'm sorry, look at Bashar Krishma, where? Al Maimer Hasifri Hanal. So there's a Maimer in Siddur which is called Chol Karenu Eilov, Eilov Leila Midesav. And a second source will be Imre Bina Bepesach Hashar. Imre Bina is a Mittler Rebbe Sefer, one of the most profound discourses of Chassidus. It's a whole book, actually. And Pesach Hashar is like the introduction. Pesach Hashar means the opening of the opening gate, which is the opening introduction to Imre Bina. Imre Bina is a long explanation of Krishma and all its kavanas and all the levels and so on. So those are the two places he quotes where he explains the difference between Shemona Esrei and Krishma, with the focus that Krishma is Eilov Leila Midesav, and Shemona Esrei is Hadbig Midesav, which, as I said, is two steps, two parts of Avodas Hashem. He still has to explain how this is going to help elevate. This elevation, rather, helps us create the Yichud of Kudsha Brich V'Shchinte. So he's now going to explain in more detail what Shema does, and he's going to draw on what we learned earlier. If you remember, Hamayich Be'echad, at length, what is the extended contemplation on Echad, Hamayich Be'echad, was the contemplation of Achdus from the lowest levels to the highest levels, Adrei Mamaylis. So he's tying now all this together. And as we'll see, this helps tremendously understand and can be understood by the Maimer HaMagbiel L'Sheves of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, which I will bring into the picture after we learn some few key basic points here. But I'll stop again for any questions. Okay. By Inyan who? So what's the Inyan in this? Kamoshin is barely ill. Like we learned, like it was explained earlier, And this is page 1421. I'm talking about 20 pages back. Here the Rebbe Rashab is tying it together. Be'inyan hamayrich be'echad. So the Lashon is, Kol hamayrich be'echad, ma'richin le'yoma v'shneisov. Back on 1421. Let me just make sure. Yeah. The truth is, he started hamayrich be'echad, I think, even earlier. Yeah, he started on 1417. But there he asked questions first. The real explanation starts 1421. So what do we learn there? That Mayrich be'echad, which literally means, Mayrich is from the word extending. And there's different meanings in extending echad. There's some place that says to extend actually the pronunciation. And when you say echad, you don't just say echad, you say echad. And some people say it even longer. You like an emphasis with a dalid. I mean, there's different opinions also what exactly you extend. But here he's teaching Amayr Be'echad in contemplation of Echad, that you extend your contemplation, your Mayrich in contemplating on the Zibonenus and Echad. Shehu liyachde yizbarach, that Mayrich Be'echad means that you're uniting God. God, of course, is one. But existence doesn't necessarily feel that. So the mitzvah here is, Mayrich Be'echad is, the commandment is, to extend your contemplation, the Yachti is Baruch Adrema Mailas, same language used by Kudsha Brich V'Shchinte, to the highest of levels. That's why it's Amayrich, because to go through all the levels takes time. It's not just a matter of time, it's a matter of in-depth contemplation. You're not doing it in a very superficial way. You're not doing it quickly and moving on. You're immersing yourself. Mayrich be'echad means when a person reads something on a what's the word I want to use, on like a quick read, a cursory read, so it's like quick and they glance over it. Mayrich is the opposite. You're immersing yourself in it. And what's the immersion? To be miyachid yizbarach, all the levels. Where you start with existence, ches daled, the 7 heavens and earth, space, the 4 different directions. Baruch Shem Zman, basically taking the time and space of the diversity and the multiplicity of the multitudes of this world, and saying, it's not self-made, it's not just separate pieces, it's all part of Dvar Hashem. God's words, Dvar Hashem Shemayim Nasu, Basarim Amoris Nivra Eilov, that God spoke and his words created existence. But it goes further if you remember. Where do the words come from? From God's thoughts. Where do the thoughts come from? From God's faculties, attributes. Where do they come from? The Keiches Nalomim and Keser. Where does Keser come from? Ak. Atik. The higher Ak. Then Atik of Ak. And all the way before the Tzimtzum where God first envisioned existence. And that too is still Shechina. All the way to Atzmus Ein Sof. That's higher than Oir and Shem altogether. Eilov v'leila medesa. So you see from this, that's what Shema consists of. The Mayrich be'echad. L'yachdi yizbarach adrei mamaz b'chinas ha-yichud, not just the Yichud of Atzilus, or the Yichud of Ak, a Yichud of Atzmus Ein Sof, shekedem ales haratzon. We're going all the way to Atzmus Ein Sof, even before it arose in his desire to create existence. Because there's no 2 levels. By God, it's all one God that then manifests in all these levels. And we're retracing the steps in Shema, the Mayrich be'echad, to reconnect all of existence all the way to that level. As we learned earlier. Not just Shmoy, but Shmoya Atzmi, which he called, which is like Kodem Kekadmusei, is one like Yechelis Atzmus. And that's why, now bring it back to mitzvahs, and that's why vayedei ha'Allah, b'bchinas hayichud de krishma, and Dafka Krishma does this. This message is not in Shema Esrei. It doesn't talk about Hashem Echad. The message is also not in other places. It's Dafka Shema, the Ma'arich Be'echad, that does this. And that's why the Halah, in this Yichud of Krishma, where you're uniting everything to the highest levels of Atzmus, and you're actually saying, if you recall, that that highest unity is down here below in existence. So that's why through this Halah, mamshichim al yedei ha-mitzvos b'chinas Kudsha Brichu b'madrega ha-yesel yena shenizbar le'il. That's why Shema is klolos kol ha-mitzvos, because through it you're mamshich, through the mitzvahs, Kudsha Brichu in the highest level that we discussed earlier, Kudsha Brichu all the way Atzmus Ein Sof. Okay. Now, let me just connect this with the mimer of the Alter Rebbe, the bigger theme of Ayin Beis, that it all began with Hamagbir L'Shevis, when the Alter Rebbe, when the Rebbe Rasha began on page 1350 to talk about the Hamshachim of Mai Lamata of Torah. He began to cite the mimer Hamagbir L'Shevis, Mika Hashem Elokeinu Hamagbir L'Shevis. And he brought from there, if you recall, the discussion about Ner Mitzvah V'Torah Er and Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. Explained that a Ner consists of three components: the oil, the wick, the oil, and the light it creates. And that's a triad that first neshamas do so in their own avodah through his abundance of Krishma. That's what the Alter Rebbe explains. And the Rebbe Rashab cited that. If you go back to page 1350 through 1352, he sums it up. That first there's the avodah of the neshama when it says Shema. The neshama, through avodah of Krishma, is miyachid, like we just said, accesses that yichud and contemplates on it, and in turn affects the animal soul, that it too, which is the shemen, the oil, instead of pursuing and using its chachma, its shemen, for self-preservation and for self-interest, which is what an animal soul does, you're directing that shemen to follow the psila of the nefesh alikis, the wick, that in turn turns it into oir, into the ava kerish be'esh, the love of God, like a fire, flame. That's the first step, he explains there. So that's Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, impacting the animal soul to love God with a fiery flame, like a fiery flame. Then he goes on to say, now Ner Mitzvah comes to add something. What does it come to add? That a mitzvah has a unique sgula, he said, a sgula miyuchedes, or sgula protis, to help elevate the animal soul and the world. So true, neshama can do to some extent in Shema, but a mitzvah makes it even stronger. And that's where he brings that. We put on talis and tefillin before davening, because the mitzvah is a makif. So which is the ratzon elyon. So when a person does a mitzvah, puts on talis and tefillin, and then they daven and say Shema, so the Shema is far enriched, because the mitzvah turns it into something that is tangible. Shema itself is a hisbonenus, a contemplation. The mitzvah turns the ratzon elyon to tangible. You're actually binding yourself with tefillin, and you're wrapping yourself with a talis. So that adds to the aliyah of the nefesh habamis through Shema of the neshama. So then we have, so Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the Isaf of Ner Mitzvah. What about Torah Er? So he goes on to say that Teireh is Hamshachim Amayl Lamato. A mitzvah is still your elevating existence. It's a physical object. Teireh is a atzmi. Now you're getting the highest levels of giluyim. That you're not just elevating the soul and the animal soul to the level of neir mitzvah, which is only a candle, but Teireh, a full-blown divine revelation. Like he explains at length there. But based on what we're learning now, and this is something that Tzemach Tzedek talks about, you could also say Shema, just like mitzvahs add something to Shema, Shema adds something to mitzvahs. What he's saying here. In other words, without the mitzvah, you don't have that additional support. But on the other hand, without Shema, you don't have the Yichud with Etzem. Because it's Shema that reaches Eilov v'leila midesov. You said the Yichud, the Atzmus Ein Sof, which is Klolos Kol HaMitzvahs. So in a way, the Rebbe Rashab is adding a piece here that helps cement the connection between Ner Hashem Nishmas Odam and Shema with mitzvahs. So there's what mitzvahs do for the tefillah, and there's what Shema does for the mitzvahs. Just wanted to add that piece. As far as Teireh goes, he does not get back to that in Hemshech Ayin Beis, but I will definitely elaborate on that, because based on what we do learn, and based on the original Maimonim that I'm quoting, we could extrapolate and understand the meaning of also Teireh. But that's already a higher level of Gilui, what the Rebbe Rashab calls a Atzmi. I hope that was clear what I just said. Okay, so let me stop here with any questions. Because we're going to talk more about Shema in this context. So I wanted to go slowly here. Any question? Okay. Let me see. Do we learn further, or should we stop here? Let me see.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was just wondering that all you said could also apply to women if they voluntarily say Shema Kulu.
First of all, why do you say voluntary? How do you know they don't have the mitzvah to say Shema?
I thought that they were mitzvahs asay zman groma.
It's not Zman Groma Shema. Shema is maybe when you say it is Zman Groma, but the 6 mitzvahs that women that are not time bound, one of them is Achdus Hashem. So they definitely have the mitzvah of the Yachid to connect into the divine unity. Whether they say Shema when they say it, that may be more optional. But the concept of Yichud is across the board for all. This is like
that's precisely why I asked.
Yeah.
But it's not specifically the Shema. They can do, they can connect whatever.
Why not? They could say it whenever they want to say it. You could say Shema anytime. I mean, I don't remember now the exact halachic obligations about saying Shema. I would have to look it up. But my understanding is The mitzvah of Yichud for sure they have, and Shema may be the way they do it. Whether it's optional through Shema or not, it's not. That's already a technicality. Just like women, it says, are born like circumcised. They don't need to be circumcised.
Yeah, they're on a higher level than the men. Men has to fix
It's not the
themselves
higher.
up.
It's not about higher or lower. It's just that they're achieving the same thing through different ways. It's just that's what it means. It doesn't mean that they're exempt. There's no such thing. Everybody is charged to serve God. Nobody is exempt from serving God and connecting to God. That's no difference between men and women. What you're talking is only the differences is only functional, like the difference between a Kohen and a Levi and a Yisrael. Okay. I think I will stop here, not because I want to stop, but because the next section needs a little more explanation, take more than a few minutes, because he's going to go now. It's very, I feel very connected, and I'm only getting this now. The second time we learned it, first time we learned it, I didn't see the direct connection, but it's really the theme of Ayin Beis in general, and also the connection to Magbil Sheves of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe. Like we see, he's going to talk about that Shema has in it two things, Halah and Amshacha. If you remember, Torah is Amshacha Mamayla Lamata. Tefillah is Mamat Lamayla. And now he's going to say Shema has both. So I want to elaborate on that more, and I want to give it the right amount of time, do justice to the topic. So I'm going to stop here, the bottom line, last line on page 1441. But as you see, I am connecting it now to the central theme, especially as we get closer to the end. He's soon going to go back to the mimer of Amagbir L'Shavis. That's on page 1463. And he began on 1350. So you see, this is all anchored around that mimer, as well as some other mimerim, obviously. As I've mentioned, the mimer Veinenu Me'ires, the mimer Yiseva Venu, and the mimer, the beer on Hashem Li Be'ezri, a whole bunch of mimerim the Rebbe Rashab has merged together to develop this whole big picture that we're learning now. Yesterday, I gave a bigger overview, the context of Neshama, Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, Ner Mitzvah, and Torah Ed. But we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go. And also, as I said, I'm writing it up in an essay, so which is now part 3 will be coming out next week. And yeah, okay. Any final questions? For now, that is, for today. Okay. Okay, so I'll stop here. Last line on page 14.